All right, everyone, get ready, because today we're diving deep into the fascinating world of biodiversity.
That's right. It's like a personalized biology lesson just for you, exploring all the incredible variety of life that's all around us.
Also, so what exactly is biodiversity? Like, what makes it so special?
Well, it's not just about counting every single living thing out there. It's actually way more complex than that.
Okay, so there's more to it than meets the eye.
Absolutely. We're talking about diversity at different levels, diversity in habitats, species, and even down to the genes within those species.
Oh, I see. So it's like layers of being different, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Like zooming in with a camera, first you see the whole forest, then you focus on individual trees, then even closer to the tiny veins in a single leaf.
That's a really cool visual.
It helps to picture it that way.
Hmm.
So let's start with habitat diversity. Imagine you're exploring a coastline.
Okay, I'm picturing it now.
You've got sandy beaches right next to windswept dunes, and maybe even some salt marshes a little further inland. Each of those is a unique habitat, right?
Yeah, totally different vibes.
And because they're so different, each one is home to a particular set of plants and animals that are specifically adapted to thrive in those conditions. That's habitat diversity in action.
So that's like the big picture diversity, the variety of different environments.
Exactly. Now let's zoom in a bit and talk about species diversity.
Okay, so we're going from the whole coastline to a specific spot on that coastline.
Perfect. Imagine you're walking through a bustling woodland. You might spot towering trees alongside delicate wildflowers, maybe some buzzing insects and chirping birds. And if you're lucky, you might even see a sneaky fox darting through the undergrowth.
Sounds like a pretty lively woodland.
It is. And each of those living things, the trees, flowers, insects, birds, and the fox, represents a different species. The more different kinds of species you have in an area, the higher the species diversity.
Makes sense. The more the merrier, right?
Pretty much. And then we have the third level, which can be a little trickier to grasp genetic diversity.
Yeah, that one sounds a bit more complicated.
Think of it this way. Even within the same species, there's a ton of variation.
Oh. Okay, explain that one.
Let's take human blood types as an example. We have different alleles. These are basically tiny variations in our genes that determine if we have type A, B, AB, or O blood. That's genetic diversity at work.
Oh, so even though we're all humans, we have these little differences in our DNA that make us unique.
That's it. And that's super important because that genetic diversity is what allows species to adapt to changes in their environment. The more variation there is within a species, the better their chances of survival if they're faced with things like disease or, climate change.
So it's like having a backup plan written into their DNA, just in case things get rough.
You got it.
Okay, so we've got these three awesome levels of diversity. But how on earth do scientists even begin to wrap their heads around something so vast? It's not like they can just count every single organism on the planet, right?
Haha, no, that would be quite the task. That's where the magic of sampling comes in. Scientists have developed all sorts of clever techniques and tools to estimate biodiversity.
Cool, so what kind of tools are we talking about?
Well, imagine scientists out in the field tossing a square frame called a quadrat onto the ground. They then count all the plants within that area to get a sense of the plant diversity.
That's pretty neat. It's like taking a snapshot of a tiny piece of the ecosystem.
Exactly. And then there are sweep nets for catching insects in the air, or pitfall traps for those sneaky critters that like to scurry beneath the surface.
It sounds like a detective story trying to piece together the biodiversity puzzle with all these different tools.
I like that analogy. And once they've collected their data, scientists use a couple of key concepts to measure biodiversity.
Okay, so what are we measuring exactly?
One important measure is species richness, which basically means the number of different species present in a particular area. So, for example, a tropical rainforest with hundreds of tree species would have a higher species richness than a grassland that might only have a dozen or so.
Okay, so more species equals richer diversity. Makes sense. But I'm guessing it's not just about the sheer number of species, right?
You're catching on quick. There's also species evenness, which looks at the relative abundance of each species.
Okay, break that down for me.
Let's say we have two habitats, each with 30 organisms. In the first habitat, 28 of those organisms belong to one dominant species, and there are only 2 individuals from another species. But in the second habitat, you find 15 individuals from each of the 2 species.
So even though both habitats have the same number of species, that second one feels more diverse because the species are more evenly spread out.
You nailed it. And that's why species evenness matters. It tells us about the balance and stability of an ecosystem.
So it's not just about quantity, it's about how those species are distributed within that ecosystem.
Exactly. And then there's a handy tool called Simpson's Index of Diversity. Think of it like a scorecard for biodiversity. The higher the number, the more diverse the ecosystem.
Cool. So it's a way to quantify that diversity and compare different areas. Okay, so we've zoomed in on specific habitats and how to measure their diversity. Now, let's zoom out to the global scale. What about understanding the big picture of biodiversity, the total number of species on Earth?
That's where things get really mind-boggling. Scientists have identified and named somewhere between 1.5 and 1.75 million species so far.
Wow, that's a lot of species. But I'm guessing that's not the whole story, right?
Not even close. They estimate that the actual number of species on Earth could be anywhere from 5 to a whopping 100 million.
Whoa, that's a huge GE range. Why is it so difficult to get a more precise number?
Well, some groups of organisms, like bacteria and insects, are incredibly diverse and notoriously tricky to study. Plus, there are still so many unexplored corners of our planet, especially those dense, lush rainforests. Who knows what amazing creatures are hidden in those unexplored depths?
Yeah, it's like we've only just begun to scratch the surface of Earth's biodiversity.
It's mind-blowing to think about all those undiscovered species out there. But speaking of challenges, there's a pretty big one we need to address: climate change. How does that impact biodiversity? Climate change is a major game changer. It's throwing a wrench into the delicate balance of ecosystems worldwide.
So it's disrupting the natural order of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's causing shifts in temperatures and rainfall patterns, and even messing with the timing of natural events like migrations and flowering. And a lot of this is due to, human activities.
Right, we're changing the rules of the game, and not every species can keep up.
That's a good way to put it. These changes can make certain areas completely uninhabitable for some species, forcing them to migrate in search of more suitable conditions.
And if they can't adapt or move fast enough,
Then they face the very real threat of extinction.
it's a harsh reality. Are there any real-world examples of how climate change is impacting biodiversity right now?
Oh, definitely. There are a lot, unfortunately. Take the sooty copper butterfly, for example. Its range has shifted northward by over 60 miles in just the last few decades because of warming temperatures.
Wow, that's a long way to move.
It is. They're basically chasing the cooler climates they need to survive. And then there's the tragic case of a coral reef near Panama. A small increase in ocean temperature back in 1998 caused massive damage, leading to the extinction of at least one coral species and threatening countless others.
It's heartbreaking to think about these species struggling just to hang on. It really makes you realize why protecting biodiversity is so important.
Couldn't agree more. And it goes way beyond just appreciating the beauty of nature. Biodiversity is crucial for our economy, our health, and even our ethical responsibilities.
Let's break that down a bit. We hear a lot about the economic value of biodiversity, but what does that really mean in practical terms?
Well, think about all the things we get from nature. Countless species provide us with the raw materials we need for food, clothing, medicine, fuel. The list goes on and on.
It's easy to forget that so much of what we rely on comes from the natural world.
Right, and who knows what potential lies within those undiscovered species we were talking about earlier. They could hold the key to new medicines or incredible technologies that we can't even imagine yet.
So protecting biodiversity is about more than just saving cute animals. It's about safeguarding our own well-being and our future.
You got it. And then there's the ecological importance of biodiversity. It's basically the glue that holds ecosystems together.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
Picture this: a complex web of interactions, like a delicate dance between different species. Food chains, nutrient cycles, habitats, they all depend on a diverse cast of characters to function properly.
Gotcha. So it's all about teamwork in the natural world.
Exactly. For example, think about a grizzly bear in the heart of a forest. Its survival hinges on a healthy salmon population, which in turn relies on a thriving population of herring.
So the bear needs the salmon needs the herring. It's all connected.
Right. And if something disrupts the herring population, let's say overfishing or pollution, it creates a ripple effect up the food chain, impacting both the salmon and the bear.
Like a domino effect, one piece falls and the whole structure is weakened.
Precisely. And it's not just about these dramatic predator-prey relationships either. Biodiversity is also crucial for things like pollination, decomposition, and even regulating our climate-essential services that keep our planet healthy and habitable.
We don't always think about those things, but they're vital for life as we know it.
Absolutely. And then there's the ethical dimension of biodiversity. Many believe that all living things have an intrinsic right to exist, regardless of their usefulness to us.
So it's about respecting the inherent value of all life, not just the species that benefit us directly.
Exactly. And we can't forget about the sheer beauty and wonder of biodiversity, those stunning landscapes, the fascinating creatures, the awe-inspiring natural wonders. They enrich our lives in countless ways.
It's easy to take those things for granted, but they're so important for our well-being.
You said it.
Now, let's talk about agriculture.
Yeah.
I know it often gets a bad rap when it comes to the environment, but how does biodiversity fit into the picture?
Believe it or not, biodiversity is actually the foundation of sustainable agriculture.
Oh, really? How so?
A diverse range of crops is essential for food security for both humans and livestock. It's like having a diversified investment portfolio. You're less vulnerable to risk if you don't put all your eggs in one basket.
So spreading things out makes the system more resilient.
Exactly. And remember the Irish potato famine. A devastating disease wiped out the two main potato varieties they were relying on, highlighting the dangers of limited crop diversity.
That's a stark reminder of how important it is to have a variety of crops to fall back on.
Absolutely. And biodiversity also provides us with natural pest control. Think about ladybugs munching on aphids or birds feasting on caterpillars. Those are our allies in the fight against pests.
So it's nature's own pest control system. I bet pollination is another key service provided by biodiversity.
Your bet. Bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, they're all essential for the reproduction of countless plants, including many of the crops we depend on.
It's amazing how all these pieces fit together.
It is, but sadly, that intricate tapestry of biodiversity is facing some serious threats right now. We've already touched on climate change, but habitat loss is another huge issue.
What do you mean by habitat loss?
As human populations grow, we're encroaching on natural habitats, fragmenting them, and pushing species towards the brink. It's like we're squeezing nature into smaller and smaller spaces, leaving them with nowhere to go.
And then there's overexploitation, the unsustainable hunting, fishing, and harvesting of plants and animals.
Right. It's like we're taking more than nature can replenish, depleting populations and disrupting those delicate balances we were talking about.
And we can't forget about pollution, whether it's chemical runoff from agriculture, plastic waste in our oceans, or air pollution from factories. It all takes a toll.
It's a lot to grapple with. But despite all these challenges, there are reasons to be optimistic. There's incredible work happening around the world to protect species and restore habitats.
That's good to hear. What kind of work is being done?
For starters, we're seeing some endangered species making remarkable comebacks. The giant panda, once on the verge of extinction, has been downgraded from endangered to vulnerable thanks to decades of conservation efforts.
That's fantastic news.
It is. And in the United States, the bald eagle has made a remarkable recovery and is no longer considered endangered.
Those are inspiring stories. It shows that we can make a difference when we put our minds to it.
Exactly. And technology is playing a bigger role in conservation these days. We have satellites and drones monitoring deforestation, DNA analysis helping us understand genetic diversity, and artificial intelligence making sense of massive amounts of data.
So we're harnessing technology to help protect biodiversity.
We are, but technology alone isn't enough. We need dedicated people on the ground, communities working together, and a shared commitment to protecting the natural world.
So it really does take a global effort to make a real impact. But what about us as individuals? What can we do to help conserve biodiversity? It all feels kind of overwhelming sometimes.
I hear you. It's easy to think that our actions don't really matter. But just imagine millions of people making those same small changes. That's a force to be reckoned with.
Okay, so I'm ready to be part of that force. Where do we even begin?
Well, you're already on the right track. Just by being here and learning about biodiversity and why it's so important, knowledge is power, right?
So step one,
Yeah.
educate ourselves and stay informed. Got it. What about some practical things we can do in our daily lives?
Oh, there are tons. Start by simply reducing your environmental footprint, conserving water and energy, cutting down on waste, choosing sustainable products whenever you can. All those little choices add up.
So being a conscious consumer, voting with our wallets for a healthier planet.
Exactly. And don't forget about supporting all those amazing organizations out there that are dedicated to protecting biodiversity. There are so many groups doing incredible work. You can volunteer your time, donate to their causes, or even just help spread awareness about their efforts.
Okay, so we can educate ourselves, make sustainable choices, and support conservation groups. What else can we do to really make a difference?
Your voice matters more than you think. Talk to your friends and family about biodiversity. Encourage them to make changes and get involved. And don't be afraid to contact your elected officials and push for policies that protect the environment.
So it's about speaking up, spreading the word, and pushing for change at all levels. Now that we're wrapping up, I'm curious, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges facing biodiversity right now?
Well, habitat loss is definitely a major threat. As the human population keeps growing, we're encroaching more and more on natural habitats, fragmenting them, and pushing so many species towards the brink.
It's like we're leaving less and less space for nature to thrive.
And then there's climate change, which is already disrupting ecosystems worldwide.
Oh, yeah.
It's altering habitats, throwing off migration patterns, and causing more frequent extreme weather events, all of which have a devastating impact on biodiversity.
And we can't forget about overexploitation, the unsustainable hunting and fishing and harvesting of plants and animals that are pushing many species towards extinction.
It's a complex web of interconnected issues. But
Yeah.
even with all these challenges, there are still glimmers of hope. There's incredible work being done all around the world to protect species and restore damaged ecosystems.
Phew, I was hoping you'd say that. Give me some good news. Tell me about some success stories.
All right, well, how about this? The giant panda, which was once critically endangered, has actually been downgraded to vulnerable thanks to decades of conservation efforts in China.
That's amazing. It's proof that dedicated efforts can really pay off.
And in the United States, the bald eagle has made a remarkable comeback, too. It's no longer considered endangered, which is a huge victory for conservation.
Those are truly inspiring stories. They show that we can turn things around when we work together.
Exactly. And we've got technology on our side, too. We have satellites and drones helping us monitor deforestation, DNA analysis giving us insights into genetic diversity, and artificial intelligence making sense of massive amounts of data, all in the name of protecting biodiversity.
So we're equipping ourselves with powerful new tools in the fight for a healthier planet.
But remember, technology is just a tool. In the end, it's up to all of us to step up and be stewards of the natural world.
Well said. This deep dive has been a whirlwind of information. I feel like I've learned so much about the beauty, the complexity, and the fragility of biodiversity. It's been a real eye-opener.
I'm so glad to hear that. Remember, the future of biodiversity is in our hands. Every action we take, no matter how small, can make a difference.
So what are we waiting for? Let's get out there and make those differences happen. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey into the world of biodiversity. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a fascinating